Okay, how are we doing today? Thumbs up? Thumbs up? Good. Folks have good weekends? Not stressful yet? Hopefully they stay not stressful as long as possible, even though that's not going to happen. Here's Jasper. He's here to remind me to start recording, which I already did. So, first a reminder of attendance, which is kind of preaching to the choir to you all who showed up on time. Thank you. I also sent this out in a announcement yesterday. I realize people are still sorting out registration, but there is a soft attendance requirement for the class. After you miss 6 two-sentence papers, you can fail the class. There were a bunch of folks who were registered all week last week and missed 2 of the 3 meetings. That's why I'm concerned. This soft attendance requirement does apply to discussion sections. So I heard from Polyphony that there was a particular problem with attendance with discussion sections on Friday. Those are required. Those are an important part of the class and the way the class is designed. Now I realize this is early in the morning for you all. So one possibility that occurred to me is that you might be rushing out and you might be faced with a choice between getting here on time and getting breakfast. So as an experiment, I borrowed an idea from one of my colleagues, Professor Gunn, and I'm bringing some snacks. So I have apples and peanut butter. If you missed breakfast or otherwise you're just feeling kind of hungry and you need a little food to be able to pay attention and be successful in class, they're right here. Feel free to come up and grab an apple and a thing of peanut butter. If there are other things you want, let me know and potentially I could provide those. And if these don't seem popular, that's no problem. I will eat the apples and the peanut butter. You don't feel obligated to eat the snacks for me. Any questions on attendance or other stuff like that? Okay. So, as a reminder from last time, really just last Thursday, we started talking about analyzing arguments by identifying premises and conclusions. We looked at 2 specific techniques for doing this, using indicator words like since or because, to identify premises, so therefore to identify conclusions. And we also talked about what I call the take-home message heuristic for finding the conclusion when there isn't an indicator word in the argument. I didn't see any major questions or a sense of confusion in the 2-sentence papers. People don't usually have a lot of trouble with premises and conclusions. But are there any questions left over from last time about premises and conclusions? Very good. So now we will move right along to premise-conclusion form. Premise-conclusion form is a way of breaking arguments down into their basic parts, the different claims that make them up, for further analysis. Premise-conclusion form gives us a way to kind of lay out the argument visually. We'll see an even more visual method next week when we start talking about argument maps. And it's also handy for being able to do things like refer to a premise by a number rather than repeating the premise endlessly. The idea with premise-conclusion form is that we're going to take the different claims of the argument, the different premises, and the conclusion. We're going to put each claim on its own line. We're going to number each line. And we're always going to put the conclusion at the end, the very last sentence, the very last line, wherever else it appears in what I call the prose or the paragraph version of the argument. So here's an example argument we looked at last time. While performing an autopsy on a dead sea turtle, Dr. Stacy found shrimp in the turtle's throat. Sea turtles can only catch shrimp if they are stuck in nets with the shrimp. Therefore, the dead sea turtle was probably caught in a net. So we looked at this. We highlighted the 2 premises in blue and the conclusion in red. And now we want to rewrite this argument in premise conclusion form. So I'm going to start a numbered list. Actually, I usually do the conclusion first. That will make more sense in a few weeks when we start looking at found arguments, that is, arguments you find out in the real world. For the moment, we're just going to start with the conclusion. And we usually add some kind of indicator for the conclusion. We'll kind of see why in a couple of slides. This can be an indicator word, therefore, or so. Therefore gets a comma, so doesn't. I don't know why. English is weird. Another thing you can do if you're feeling fancy is you bring up your symbols. I have no idea how to do this on a Windows, by the way. And you can put in this little 3-dot symbol, which is a mathematician symbol for therefore. Sometimes I use the 3 dots, sometimes I use therefore or so. Whichever you prefer is fine with me. So we have the conclusion, and we have it marked, in this case, using the 3 dots for the conclusion symbol. And then we're going to put the premises up above it in blue. So we have Dr. Stacy found shrimp in the turtle's throat. And sea turtles can only catch shrimp if they're stuck in nets with the shrimp. So just like that, we have the 3 claims of this argument, the 2 premises and the conclusion. Each claim is on its own line, each line is numbered, and the conclusion is at the end. Questions about this? Duncan?
Regarding doing this on Windows, inside of any Google application, if you go up to the insert, while inside of a text box, you can select insert and then special characters, and then search the name of it, and this particular one is named therefore.
Okay, so if you're working in something like Google Docs or Google Slides, you can go up to insert and insert a special character and type the name therefore. It's a little less elegant than on a Mac where I just have to hit the function key to bring up the menu, but yeah. Jonathan?
The Windows version of that key is just Windows period, and it pulls up the same key.
Oh, Windows period. Okay, even better. Okay. Yeah, and Ayush, right? Did you have a hand up? No. No, okay. Other hands, we're good? Okay, premise conclusion form doesn't usually give people a lot of trouble either, but we do want to go ahead and practice. So I'm actually going to put this whole argument over here. Yeah, we'll read through the argument real quick as a group. Some companies are creating genetically modified animals, such as salmon, that provide more meat for consumers. If genetically modified salmon escaped into the wild, they would compete with natural salmon for food. Natural salmon, though, have been honed by natural selection to flourish in the wild. Genetically modified salmon are not designed to flourish in the wild. Thus, non-genetically modified salmon would outcompete genetically modified salmon if genetically modified salmon escaped into the wild. Okay. A little more complex than the arguments we were looking at last week, so I thought this would also be a nice time to practice just identifying premises and conclusions in a group. So what we're going to do first, make sure ideally a few folks at your table have grabbed this tiny URL. It will also be up on the big screens when I do this. Okay, so now what you're going to do is you're going to have one person drive for your group, plug their laptop or their device into one of the HDMI cables at your table. Okay. When you've done that, can't really see, you can grab the control panel thing, and you may have to try several different inputs, just the left-hand ones, to figure out which input number matches the HDMI cable that you're plugged into. Okay, so first task is just the technical task of getting someone's laptop mirrored up onto one of your displays. And I'll be circulating to help out. Maybe Polyphony can help out as well. Once you have that done, group 2 looks all ready to go. Carve off a piece of the Google Doc for your table. And first, just identify premises and conclusions. You can use the color highlighting like we did last week. And then put it into premise conclusion form. Okay, so get the display working, identify premises and conclusions, and put things into premise conclusion form. And I might actually split folks up into smaller tables, but I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. First priority is getting the displays working. Okay, thank you for your patience. Let's see, I'm going to leave you with your displays for the moment so you can see your versions. But up on the big screens, we'll have the slides for the moment. So first, we need to identify premises and conclusions. I like to start by identifying the conclusion. Can someone tell me where the conclusion is? Jonathan.
After thus in the last sentence.
Yep, it's this final sentence right here, thanks to the indicator word. Let me grab that. And I need a numbered list. We can actually just use this. OK, so I got my conclusion. Premises. Reasons to accept this conclusion. What are we working with? Oh, cool, the apples were popular. I got 2 more. Premises. Where are some premises in this argument? Somebody at table 3, give me a premise.
One premise is natural salmon by natural selection flourished in the wild.
Good. We got one premise right here. Where else? Oakley.
Genetically modified salmon are not designed to flourish in the wild.
Good. So these 2 premises are giving us a contrast. Whoops. Been doing better so far today. These 2 premises are giving a contrast between natural salmon on the one hand and genetically modified salmon on the other hand. So each claim, each premise is only about one of the 2. One premise is about natural salmon, the other premise is about genetically modified salmon. We need claims about both of them because what we're getting in the conclusion is a comparison, right? In the conclusion, we're making a comparison between non-genetically modified or natural salmon versus genetically modified salmon. So we need claims about both of them. I should highlight this in blue. There's one more premise here. Maybe somebody at table 8? Jonathan.
If genetically modified salmon is taken to the wild, they would compete with natural salmon for food.
Good. Whoops. Except So this premise is setting up the comparison between the 2 kinds of salmon in terms of competing for food. Then we get 2 more premises that build on that comparison for each group of salmon, one at a time. And then the conclusion gives us a final comparison between the 2 groups of salmon. So this argument needs all 3 in order to support the conclusion. But what we're practicing here is putting things in premise-conclusion form. As a reminder, that means that each claim is on its own line. Each line is numbered, and we have the conclusion at the end. So we have each claim on its own line here. The lines are numbered, and we have the conclusion at the very end. So this is premise-conclusion form. Questions about this example? OK, so pulling you all back to my screen. Just a little fancy terminology and thinking a little bit more broadly about some of the stuff we've actually already been talking about so far, unstated assumptions in arguments. first, we can have implied premises. We use the term, the Greek word enthymeme, for an argument with implied premises. Sometimes usually the term gets used for an argument with implied premises. It can also be used for the implied premise itself. We're not going to be worrying so much about identifying enthymemes or implied premises in this unit. It's going to be a relevant idea for what we do when we analyze specific kinds of arguments later on, which is why I wanted to talk about it now. You don't need to know the word enthymeme. You just need to remember what it means in like 4 weeks when I use it again. In the salmon example, there is an implied premise or an implicit premise about the relationship between flourishing in an environment and outcompeting other organisms. Right? The premises up here are about flourishing in the wild. The conclusion is about which kind of salmon could outcompete the other. So there's an implied premise that connects those two ideas. Flourishing in an environment and outcompeting other organisms. Does that make sense? The premises are talking about flourishing in the wild. The conclusion is talking about outcompeting. We need to connect those two ideas. And so the argument assumes a connection that I captured in this implied premise. Talking with a few other folks while you all were working on this, other folks identified some other implied premises, maybe things about like genetically modified salmon existing, things like that. There are lots of assumptions that this argument makes. Which ones we bring out and make explicit will often depend on sort of the context in which the debate is happening, what claims people care about and disagree on. For the moment, are there any questions about the idea of an enthymeme or an argument with implied premises or assumptions? Whoops. We can also have implied conclusions to arguments. So this argument is paraphrased. It's a summary of an argument that was originally, I think, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Okay. The readers of the Wall Street Journal probably do not care very much about which kind of salmon can outcompete which other kinds of salmon. It's not the main thing readers of the Wall Street Journal are interested in. They're probably more interested in whether or not the salmon should be legal, or whether they're farming genetically modified salmon, selling them to consumers should be regulated in some way or another. Okay. This argument, as I read it, has an implied conclusion that we should allow genetically modified salmon. So there's the explicit conclusion, non-genetically modified salmon would outcompete genetically modified salmon if the genetically modified ones escaped into the wild. There's the explicit conclusion. And then there's a further implied conclusion that we should allow genetically modified salmon. Does everyone see like the further implied conclusion here? Does that make sense? Good. We usually won't be so interested in further implied conclusions. But we'll often have to kind of think this way when we're analyzing especially found arguments where people aren't explicit about their conclusion. If you think back to the example on Friday, the tweet by Matthew Iglesias, where it was really unclear what the conclusion was supposed to be because he just left it implied. We may often have to do some of that work to figure out what the conclusion is supposed to be. The fancy piece of jargon for an implied conclusion is an implicature. An implicature is a further claim that is not strictly entailed by the literal language that you're using. It is something that is going beyond that, a further implied conclusion. Again, you don't necessarily need to worry about remembering the jargon. It's just nice if you're into that kind of thing. I assume pretty much all of us, to some degree or another, are on social media. And on social media, we have encountered some challenges related to implicature. So let me read this first. This is an exchange that happened on Blue Sky last month, actually, as I was working on the notes for this section. User Shiv Ramdas. No, a $71,000 job with benefits to work at Twitter is not, quote, indentured servitude, even if you'll have to leave the country if you quit. It is, in fact, the literal opposite of indenture, where you cannot leave and cannot quit. Please learn what words mean before making a cake of yourself in public like this. Next, I have family who are indentured, and you know what? We cannot even find them or their descendants. They've been vanished off the face of the earth. You have to pay the British government a fee just to be told they have no clue. Sorry, shit happens, it was a big empire. That's what indenture worked like. Then a reply from a user with the handle Minerva. Quote, at least Musk doesn't vanish people off the face of the earth is one way to defend his skirting of US labor law. And then Shiv Ramdas replies, this is a pretty remarkable demonstration of the, quote, so you hate waffles principle in action, should be archived for educational purposes. Okay, so what's going on here is often called context collapse, and it's connected to this idea of implicature and implied conclusions, and in particular, misreading implied conclusions. So with that sort of setup, what I'd like you to talk about at your tables for a few minutes is what happened here, this particular kind of communication failure, and what it has to do with the idea of implied conclusions or implicature. I'm starting off abstract, but is what I want you to do clear enough to get started? One person nods yes. Everyone else avoids eye contact. Does that mean it's not clear? I see some thumbs up, some smiles. Okay, if you're really confused, flag me down. So yeah, what happened in this exchange and why does it relate to, in some sense, a failure of implied conclusions? We'll probably do about 5 minutes with this. Okay, let's come back together. So, what went wrong in this exchange? Say again? Twitter went wrong? I mean, I don't necessarily disagree, but we can be a little more specific.
They both misunderstood each other.
They-
What they were trying to say by assuming that the other person had an implied conclusion.
Uh-huh.
Whereas like Minerva implied that Shiv was trying to justify Musk's actions when they were trying to expand on the idea of indentured servitude.
Uh-huh.
While Shiv thought that Minerva was attempting to like say that there was an implied conclusion in what he was saying instead of just misassuming what he said originally.
Okay. Duncan, do you agree?
I couldn't quite hear him.
Okay. So, what Jonathan just said, if I can paraphrase and abbreviate and you let me know if I'm getting something wrong, is that Mina read Shiv as implying a conclusion that was some kind of defense of Elon Musk. Okay. That was, it seems like, not Shiv's intention. It seems like probably Shiv's intention was just to make some claims about indentured servitude and how the actual history of indentured servitude is really different from contemporary working conditions at Twitter. Not defending Elon Musk. So Mina reads Shiv as making an implied conclusion about Elon Musk that Shiv did not intend. So that's one case where implicature went wrong, where Mina drew a conclusion that Shiv did not intend. Shiv, in the response, is also, nah, that's too complicated. You can read about what I say about Shiv's response in the textbook. We won't go there. But maybe we will say, is everyone familiar with the online trope of "so you hate waffles"? Ayush?
Basically, it's by saying something, you apply something else. And so people assume something completely different. You didn't say.
Yeah, so the trope is one person says, "I love pancakes." The second person says, "so you hate waffles." That's a failed implicature. Saying, I love pancakes doesn't strictly entail anything at all about waffles, but people often draw a mistaken inference, a mistaken implicature to something like waffles. So this is how implicature can go wrong online and in other contexts. Is anyone familiar with the term context collapse? That's a less common one. Okay, this is a term that came out of misinformation studies. And it's a way of thinking about why this kind of thing, this way implicature can go wrong on social media so much more often than it goes wrong in real life. In real life, we don't typically have exchanges that are like, "I love pancakes, so you hate waffles." But this kind of thing is very, very common in social media. The idea is implicature depends on context. Shiv was probably assuming a context in which no one is defending Elon Musk. So this is on Blue Sky. The general tone of Blue Sky is very kind of hostile towards Twitter, very hostile towards Elon Musk. There aren't a lot of people on Blue Sky who are defending Elon Musk. So Shiv probably assumed that context and that their posts, in a context where no one is defending Elon Musk, their posts wouldn't be interpreted as providing a defense of Elon Musk. Mina, on the other hand, was reading Shiv's posts in a context where maybe that was a live possibility. Maybe Mina is someone who's on both Blue Sky and Twitter, or is on Blue Sky as well as other social media sites where a lot of people are defending Elon Musk. So Mina is reading Shiv's posts in a very different context with very different possible positions that people might take. And in that context, Mina might have seen Shiv as offering something that could be interpreted as a defense of Elon Musk. So this is context collapse. The context, the original context in which Shiv made their posts, collapsed or disappeared as the post traveled to a different context, Mina's context. And so context collapse is a way that implicature can often go wrong online, and something that's good for us to be mindful of when we're in a social media context. We don't necessarily control how sort of far our ideas are spreading, for example, as they get reposted or whatever. Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, let's see. We are a little behind, but not too far behind. So we have some experience now with identifying premises and conclusions and putting arguments in premise-conclusion form. Now we want to do some actual analysis of the argument. We want to start to think about, is this a good argument? Two central concepts for thinking about a good argument are acceptability and support. A premise is acceptable if everyone in the conversation has a good reason to go along with it for the purposes of the conversation. And a set of premises provides support for a conclusion when they provide evidence or reasons to accept the conclusion. We're going to spend basically the rest of this week unpacking these two ideas. A couple of highlights at the very beginning. First of all, these are two separate independent things. We're going to talk about that much more on Thursday. We can have arguments where the premises are all acceptable and they don't provide any support, and vice versa. So these are two separate aspects that we look for in an argument. Second, they focus on different things. Acceptability is about an individual premise. So when we're analyzing an argument, we look at each individual premise and we ask, is this acceptable? Support is about the whole set of premises and how they relate to the conclusion. So support is a property of the whole argument taken together. Okay, so let's start by diving into acceptability. I have a member of my family who's very conservative. If you haven't picked it up yet, I'm very far to the left. My conservative family member is Christian and thinks we should restrict immigration. We actually had a number of arguments about this last summer, if you can believe it. Now, in the story of Jesus' birth, Mary and Joseph were migrants, and Jesus said we should love our neighbors as ourselves, so we should welcome migrants, not exclude them. We have a little argument for welcoming migrants based on a couple of Christian premises. Two questions. First, Sabrina, an actual friend of mine, an actual literal Zen Buddhist chaplain, worked in a hospital in Dallas. She's not Christian. Can Sabrina, the Zen Buddhist, give this argument that appeals to Christian premises? In my case, I'm a non-theist. Basically, I'm an atheist. Don't believe in Christianity. Can I give this argument? So, talk about those at your tables. Can my friend Sabrina, the Zen Buddhist who's not a Christian, give this argument? Can I, basically an atheist, give this argument? that yes, Sabrina can give the argument, or no, Sabrina can't give the argument?
One way, you just say that, and if they know that maybe you're trying to use these arguments a little bit to something they don't believe, then because they're a consumer believer of the Bible or whatever, they're gonna be like, well, you're not, so you just don't understand it, so why should I listen?
To add on to that, I think it's important to know whether this individual is using quotes from the Bible in their argument. If they're not using it at all, if they just believe that Asian immigrants or whatever, and they're not referencing the Bible, this makes no sense. Nobody should use it. But if they're referencing the Bible, like, oh, well, so-and-so said so-and-so, then it does make sense.
Well, that's the conclusion of the argument, right? The point of the argument is to convince
Right,
my
but
conservative
as they were saying,
family members
if I'm
that
a
we should welcome
super
ISIS.
hardcore believer, like I'm wearing multiple fabrics, then I feel like if I'm not exclusively referencing the Bible, then I might not care so much.
What do you think? Can Sabrina give this argument? Can I give this argument?
We think that in both cases, yes, because
Okay.
someone of Christian faith is involved, and therefore the argument involving a Christian rhetoric
Uh-huh.
will apply because you are challenging one of the two parties' faiths, and because that's something that they believe in,
Mm-hmm.
that argument would be applicable.
Okay. So because the Christian conservative family member,
Is involved, as long as you're not getting the rhetoric incorrect,
uh-huh,
and you're actually like sourcing it correctly,
uh-huh,
then I believe it's an applicable argument because that is something they believe and you're challenging that belief
okay.
for a different one of their beliefs.
Yeah. So if it were like Sabrina and I talking with each other,
I don't think it would apply because
Then-
neither of you believe in that rhetoric.
uh-huh.
So
We also already agree on the conclusion.
yeah, like if you guys didn't agree, I don't think a Christian
Yeah.
rhetoric would be applicable in either of these situations because it's not something I
Okay.
align with.
Ayush, and then I'm going to come over here.
I think they can both give the argument because it doesn't really matter what the personal beliefs of
Uh-huh.
the speaker is. It more so matters that the listener believes in Christianity.
Hmm.
If they basically the argument that if they believe in Christian principles, then they can't believe in this too.
Okay. Somebody over here. Denzel, was that a hand?
I think both of them can give this argument, just because you're talking to somebody who is of Christian beliefs.
Okay.
It doesn't matter whether the speaker believes in it. They're sourcing the Bible in order to get through to this conservative family.
Okay. Anyone want to argue no? Either no, Sabrina can't give this argument, or no, I can't give this argument.
I can play devil's advocate because I have a reason.
I don't like devil's advocate. We're going to talk about that. Anyone want to argue no? There were people at Elizabeth.
I don't know that I'd necessarily say I'd argue no, but
Uh-huh.
I would say that yes, in a perfect world, either of you could give this argument if you have the correct facts or sources or quotes,
Uh-huh.
but it's a matter of whether or not that person would believe you if they know that you don't genuinely believe in the Bible. Because they can make the argument of, well, yes, you're saying that, you're giving me these quotes, but you don't understand it because you don't believe it. So I don't think that it's necessarily a good argument to appeal to their faith if they know that you don't believe it.
So it might like undermine my credibility
Yeah.
or something like this. Yeah. Good. Okay. It was very interesting because the last time I taught this class, the whole class was like, no, you cannot give this argument. Sabrina cannot give this argument. When we talk about accepting claims, we're not talking about holding a strong commitment or a belief in something. I'm not going to read this whole long, slightly technical philosophical definition. The idea with acceptance is that it's something we can work with, at least for right now, for the purposes of this particular conversation. So what that means, in the context of this example, neither Sabrina nor I believe in Christianity. Neither of us has like a kind of commitment to, say, the truth of the Bible or the other kinds of things that my conservative family member has. But for the sake of argument, we can accept some Christian premises. This might work in slightly different ways for Sabrina and myself because we have different sort of positions in the scope of possible religions. But I can accept that in the story of Jesus' birth, Mary and Joseph were migrants. I can accept that, I think it was the Sermon on the Mount, although it's been a long time, that Jesus said we should love our neighbors as ourselves. I can accept those Christian premises for the sake of argument, even though I don't believe them. So when we ask, are all of the premises acceptable to everyone involved in this argument, we are not asking, does everyone believe them? We are asking, can everyone go along with them for the purposes of this particular conversation? Let me see if I included this example. Come back to that. Another example I give in the textbook is of a religious conservative, I think it's a virologist or a microbiologist or something like that. So a scientist who is also religious and rejects the idea of evolution by natural selection. This scientist doesn't believe in evolution. They don't have a commitment to evolution by natural selection being like the way humans came to be, for example. But they can say, for the purposes of understanding, how bird flu or COVID or Mpox is spreading and changing, I can accept the theory of evolution for that particular purpose. So the idea of acceptance is tied to a context in the way that implicature was, that we were talking about earlier. It's tied to the context of a particular conversation with its particular purposes and the particular people who are involved. So also means that premises that are acceptable in one context might not work in another context. So for the purposes of this unit, and in particular, the quiz you all are probably going to try on Friday, when we think about acceptability, when we think about assessing acceptability, we want to think about who would accept this premise and who would reject it. Let's go with actually this one down here. It's probably the most interesting one since we only have a couple minutes left. Children have the capacity to make reasoned decisions about their education. Let's say someone was using this premise to make an argument about middle schools or something like that. Children have the capacity to make reasoned decisions about their education. So maybe like they should get more electives in middle school, say. We want to think of who might accept this premise or who might find it acceptable. And second, who probably wouldn't find this acceptable? Take a second. You maybe have an idea or two. Turn to one person sitting near you, maybe two if there's an odd number of folks at your table, and share your answers. Someone who would accept this, someone who would reject it. Who's someone who would probably accept this premise? Devin? Oh, students. So middle school students. Other ideas for people who might? Ruby. Not everyone has quieted down yet. So the box thing is a microphone, like right in front of Alexa. Yeah. Don't put it too close because it's pretty sensitive. But OK, could you repeat yourself now?
I was thinking that probably like high school students.
OK. Middle and high school students. Anybody else? Oakley.
At first I was saying that parents wouldn't accept this, but now that I'm thinking about it a bit more, if they're seeing that their child might thrive in an environment that's more suited to them, then they might accept the fact to add electives.
OK, so maybe if we called them like liberal or progressive parents? Does that kind of capture what you were going for?
Yeah.
Close enough? Since we only got a minute left? OK, how about not accept? Jonathan.
Because a school board or like any college board or any like educational government district would not accept this because they get a lot of money in the way that they educate, and like they have like a very specific regimen, so they would not be like very happy about this. And for parents, we said that it would be mixed between accept and not accept because it depends on the parents' views of both their child, their religion, or their political views for how they would go about this statement.
OK, so just for the sake of we're out of time, we might say what we think of often as more conservative parents might think this way. OK, yeah, good. So we have a premise here that can be acceptable in certain contexts, right? But not acceptable in others or when the context involves certain people. And so when we're assessing acceptability, we have to think about that context. And I actually got right to the slide I had hoped to get to today, so that's perfect. This should be the two-sentence paper, because I changed the name. OK. Please write your two-sentence paper. It looks like I need definitely more apples, a little more peanut butter on Thursday. But that went over well. It seems people like apples. Excellent. I have to figure out where I can get them in bulk.
If you have no shame, but have.